She left her with nothing, but underestimated everything she was capable of. Claire Whitmore thought she had the perfect life, until one cruel text shattered it all. Betrayed by the man she built her world with, drained of her finances and left for a younger woman, Claire could have crumbled. Instead, she planned in silence, fought back smart, and rose from the ruins with fierce grace. This is not just a story of revenge. It's a story of reclaiming power, exposing lies, and walking away with everything while he's left with nothing. Welcome to the downfall he never saw coming. The message arrived at 2:14 p.m., just as Claire was helping a regular customer select a silk scarf for her daughter's graduation. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've emptied our joint account. Ha! Claire didn't blink. Her hand didn't tremble. She smiled softly, nodded at Mrs. Hanley's choice, and proceeded to the register. The wrapping paper folded with perfect creases, the boutique's silver logo shimmering under the warm lighting. No one in the store would have guessed that her 12-year marriage had just been detonated by a single text. She waited until the boutique was empty, until the door chimed behind Mrs. Hanley's exit, and the familiar silence settled like a cotton veil over the space. Then, and only then, she pulled out her phone, reread the message, and typed 2 words in return. Good luck. Claire Whitmore, 38 years old, sole owner of Whitmore & Co., a boutique she had built from scratch over the past 7 years, did not crumble. She didn't scream, didn't cry. That would come later, maybe, or maybe not at all. What she did was walk to the back office, lock the door, and sit at her desk. She opened the drawer, reached for the manila folder labeled Contingency, Ava G., and made a call. Claire, the voice on the other end greeted warmly. He just made his move, Claire said. There was a pause. Then so will we. Ava Grant, her lawyer and trusted confidant for the past 6 months, had prepared for this exact moment. It wasn't paranoia, it was prudence. 3 months ago, Claire had found a crumpled dinner receipt in Mark's jacket. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, and a dessert with a heart drawn in ink. Mark had said he was working late that night. Claire hadn't asked questions. She had called Ava instead. From that point on, she started shifting. A separate bank account under a different institution. Her personal savings moved discreetly. She left just enough in the joint account to avoid suspicion. 2 months' worth of business as usual deposits. She logged and categorized every questionable transaction Mark had made for the past year. Hotel charges, ride shares near clubs, bar tab. Mark thought he was cunning. What he didn't know was that Claire had already staged the battlefield. Her phone buzzed again. Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the new receptionist. Claire remembered her clearly from the Christmas party. 20, maybe 21. Long lashes, too much perfume. Claire had noticed the way Melissa's hand had lingered on Mark's arm. She had seen the way Mark had laughed too loud at her jokes. She didn't respond. Instead, Claire pulled out her laptop and logged into her boutique's financial dashboard. Profits were up 12% year over year. Not that Mark ever asked. She walked through the shop, turning the open sign to closed, and began securing the day's earnings. Every gesture was practiced. Calm, deliberate. On the shelf behind her, a photo of her and Mark, taken 8 years ago in Vermont, gathered a fine layer of dust. She didn't bother wiping it off. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of Chardonnay she'd been saving for their anniversary. The irony made her chuckle. Anniversary tomorrow would have been their 12th. She raised the glass and whispered, "To freedom." There would be no confrontation, no shouting match, no begging for explanations. Claire was done offering emotional labor to a man who saw her ambition as a hobby and her success as a threat. Tomorrow, Mark would wake up thinking he had won. He had no idea he'd already lost. The next morning, Claire awoke before the sun. Not from anxiety, she hadn't slept fitfully, but from habit. Success, after all, was a discipline. She stretched her legs out beneath the duvet, glanced at the empty side of the bed, and let out a long, measured breath. It was her bed. The deed had always been in her name, a legacy from her grandmother. Mark had asked several times to add his name, couching the request in romantic language. "What's mine is yours, babe." She'd smiled then, kissed him on the cheek, and replied, "Let's keep it simple." That decision, like so many others, had aged well. The phone buzzed again. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy." Claire stared at the words without reacting. My little shop. The condescension clung to each letter. He had always spoken of it that way, like it was a distraction, something to fill her time while he handled real work. Never mind that her boutique had, for the past 4 years, generated more annual revenue than his mid-level managerial job. She had quietly filed taxes, reinvested profits, maintained an LLC registered solely in her name. She had protected herself while he assumed she was naive. She walked down to the kitchen and made coffee, letting the silence wrap around her like armor. As the machine whirred, she opened her email and found a message from Ava. Subject: filing initiated. MG, he'll be served in Miami once he checks into the hotel. PS, his last text will make a great exhibit. Premeditation, cruelty, and financial misconduct in one paragraph. Well done. Claire smiled and took a sip. He thought he was the villain in her story. He wasn't even the protagonist. At 10:03 IMM, she called the credit card company, calm, polite, clear. "This is Claire Whitmore. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel my card." The voice on the other end was chipper and professional. "Of course, Ms. Whitmore. Can you identify the charges?" 2 first-class tickets to Miami, hotel charges at the Royal Palm, all booked with the joint card after he emptied our shared account. "Do you have any documentation?" "I do," he texted me. Bragged, actually. A pause. Then, "Please forward the messages. We'll reverse the charges immediately." She could picture it, the moment Mark and Melissa reached the gate, only to be told their tickets were invalid. The stunned silence, the growing panic, the realization that nothing had gone according to plan. He wanted a clean break. Instead, he'd triggered a clean audit. She spent the afternoon at the boutique, going through the quarterly inventory, reviewing invoices, and speaking with a supplier about a new handbag line. She didn't tell her employees. Not yet. There would be time for explanations later. After the dust settled and her business, her real work, kept thriving. In the early evening, she retrieved the wedding album from the back closet. The leather cover was cracked, edges worn. She flipped through the pages slowly, studying the frozen smiles, the champagne toasts, the eyes of a woman who hadn't yet learned how casually people could betray. Mark had looked so different then. Before the midlife crisis. Before the tight shirts, the slang, the gym obsession. Before he decided that youth could be bought and loyalty discarded. Her phone buzzed again. "Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller." Claire laughed. Out loud and without restraint. Let me stay. As if he had any claim to the home she had inherited and maintained. As if she needed his permission to breathe. Another buzz. "I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half." Her half. Claire poured another glass of wine, this time her favorite Bordeaux, and raised it once more to the empty room. "To clarity," she said softly. Mark didn't know it yet, but he hadn't just set himself free. He'd unleashed her. Friday mornings were always busy at Whitmore & Co. The bell above the door jingled steadily as customers wandered in, drawn by the clean window displays and the soft instrumental music playing overhead. The scent of eucalyptus and bergamot drifted through the air, part of Claire's carefully curated ambiance elegance without arrogance. Claire moved with practiced ease, adjusting a rack of silk blouses near the front and greeting familiar faces with a warm, measured smile. No one could tell that less than 24 hours ago her husband had tried to erase 12 years of marriage with a smirk and a one-way plane ticket. She wasn't hiding it. She was simply choosing not to perform her pain. In the back office, Ava's email waited. Subject: confirmed. Service scheduled. Location: Royal Palm Hotel, Miami. Estimated time: 2:45 p.m. Saturday. Want me to include the credit card screenshots too? She added with a winking emoji. Claire replied, include everything. Let the record show he wrote his own downfall. Mark still hadn't stopped texting. You've always been so cold, Claire, so practical. Maybe that's why this is easier than I thought. You'll regret being so petty this could have ended peacefully? She didn't answer. She forwarded the messages to Ava and kept moving. At noon, Claire joined her assistant manager to unbox a shipment of new handbags. Italian leather, clean stitching, minimalist hardware. Each piece a reminder of the standard she had built from the ground up. These weren't just accessories. They were her quiet rebellion against every time someone had underestimated her. One of the handbags reminded her of the very first prototype she'd sold from her apartment, before the boutique even existed. Mark had called it cute, said it looked like something you'd find on Etsy. She sold out of that design in 2 weeks. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. Claire opened it. Mark told us everything. I'm shocked at how you've treated him. He's devastated. You need to be more understanding. Barbara, his mother. Claire let the message sit unread for a moment. Then she stepped out of the office and returned to the main floor. A customer was admiring a pale pink trench coat near the register, and Claire approached her with a compliment and a suggestion for a matching clutch. The woman smiled, thanked her, and handed over her card without hesitation. When the boutique had first opened, Mark hadn't even come to the launch event. He'd been too tired from work. Claire had hosted it alone, served wine from Costco, and personally styled every mannequin. She'd made just enough to cover rent and utilities that first month. But she'd known, even then, this was going to be something. Back in the office, Claire finally called Barbara. Claire, dear, Barbara began, her tone tight. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Mark told us you were being difficult. Claire tapped her pen against the desk. Did he also tell you he emptied our joint account and used our shared credit card to fund a trip with his receptionists? Silent. He said you were cold, that you pushed him away. Claire's voice was even. Would you like me to read you his messages? The one where he mocks my age? Or the one where he calls my business a hobby? Another pause. He did seem unkind, Barbara admitted reluctantly. That text message was, well, I told him it was inappropriate. I've always liked you, Barbara, but my lawyer advised minimal contact with Mark's family, so I think this is where we leave it. Goodbye, Barbara. Claire ended the call. Then she opened her Notes app and typed a new entry. Exhibit C. Texts to third parties reinforcing false narrative. Outside, the bell rang again. More customers, more orders. Life didn't pause just because someone you trusted chose to become someone else, and Claire Whitmore was just getting started. By late afternoon, the whispers had started. Claire didn't need to eavesdrop. The boutique had always hummed with low conversations between customers, and today those murmurs had an edge. A few recognized her name from the small business spotlight in the Boston Chronicle. Others had seen the boutique tagged in a viral comment thread about a woman whose husband ran off and learned the hard way not to mess with a businesswoman. She didn't care much for gossip, but she understood its utility. While arranging a glass display of limited edition clutches, her assistant leaned in. Did you see this? She whispered, showing Claire a screenshot on her phone. Apparently your ex is stuck at a budget motel near the airport. People are posting about it. Claire glanced at the image. Mark's unmistakable slouch at a cracked Formica check-in counter. Melissa behind him looking decidedly less radiant than the girl from the Christmas party. The caption read, "Midlife crisis hits turbulence." Claire only said, "Please restock the black Ava satchels. They'll sell out by Sunday." Her phone vibrated again. Ava. "Emergency hearing confirmed for Monday morning," her lawyer said. "Given the fraud and the texts, we're in strong position to freeze all assets. Any sign of new financial activity?" "He tried threatening me," Claire replied. "Said he made copies of the boutique's records, that half of it is his." "Excellent," Ava said dryly. "One more thing for the judge." Claire sat at her office desk and opened the boutique's incorporation documents. Her name, and only hers, appeared on every page. She had filed them before the wedding. Every expansion, every investment, every cent documented. Mark had never paid attention, never thought she was building something that might outlast his relevance. From the hallway, she heard the bell ring again. Customers entering. The boutique was full. Business was thriving, fueled in part by a kind of communal outrage, as if every woman who had been dismissed or belittled saw themselves in Claire. They browsed with intention, complimented her taste, and often left with more than they'd planned. One customer, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a sharp blazer, lingered at the register. "My ex tried something similar," she said casually while handing over her card. "Thought he'd take everything in the divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter." Claire smiled. "They really don't." After closing, she dimmed the lights and sat at her desk, opening the small safe behind her chair. Inside was a folder she had labeled "just in case." It contained copies of tax returns, incorporation papers, invoices, even a printed-out chat log with Mark joking about letting Claire play business while he handled the real work. She took out the last item, a screenshot of the text where Mark wrote, "I used the joint card for our trip. Consider it my parting gift. LOL." It had been the moment she knew he wasn't just selfish, he was careless. He had expected a tearful scene, screaming, pleading, maybe even forgiveness. Instead, she gave him silence and paperwork. Claire placed the screenshot back in the folder, returned it to the safe, and closed the latch. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. People passed by the boutique window, some pausing to admire the new window display. A mannequin in a tailored white trench coat stood posed in quiet confidence, surrounded by clean lines and soft lighting. Tomorrow would bring more texts, more rumors, more courtroom dates. But tonight, Claire Whitmore locked her boutique, slipped her keys into her coat pocket, and walked down the quiet Boston street with the steady stride of someone who had already won the battle long before her enemy knew there was a war. The marble floor of the Suffolk County Courthouse gleamed under Claire's heels as she walked through the entryway with her head held high. Her navy pantsuit was pressed to perfection, her hair pulled into a low, immaculate bun. She clutched a structured black folder in one hand, inside it months of quiet planning and proof. She wasn't here to react, she was here to confirm. The courtroom buzzed with low voices as people filtered into the rows of wooden benches. Claire spotted Ava seated near the front, calm and collected, tapping through her tablet. She gave a small nod as Claire approached. "He's here," Ava murmured without looking up. Claire followed her gaze. Mark had just entered, flanked by a man in a slightly rumpled suit, clearly his attorney, and clearly not his first choice. Mark's new wardrobe was trying too hard. A designer blazer 2 sizes too small, dark jeans he probably thought screamed youth. Melissa wasn't with him. Claire hadn't expected her to be. Mark scanned the room and met Claire's eyes for a fraction of a second. He looked away first. A court officer called the session to order and everyone took their seats. The judge, a gray-haled woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for cutting through theatrics, adjusted her glasses and spoke. "Let's begin." Mark's attorney was first to present. His voice carried the rehearsed polish of someone trying to sell a story he didn't quite believe. "My client," Mr. Whitmore acknowledges the breakdown of the marriage and regrets the pain caused. However, we believe Mrs. Whitmore has acted in an excessively punitive manner, freezing accounts and canceling shared travel plans, which, while emotional in nature, reflect a vindictive strategy rather than fair legal recourse. Claire sat still. She had no intention of reacting. Ava stood, her voice steady and precise. Your Honor, we have documented evidence of financial misconduct. Mr. Whitmore emptied the joint account, used shared credit cards to fund a trip with his extramarital partner, and sent text messages confirming his actions in detail. We are not arguing over emotional pain. We are here for facts. The judge leaned forward. Do you have these messages? Ava handed over printed copies, neatly tabbed. The judge flipped through them. Her expression remained unreadable, but her fingers paused on one particular page. Claire knew which one it was. I used the joint card for our trip. Consider it my parting gift, LOL. Mark's attorney cleared his throat. That was clearly a flippant remark, not an admission. The judge raised an eyebrow. It reads like an admission. With laughter, Mark fidgeted. Claire watched his jaw tighten as the judge turned her attention to him directly. Mr. Whitmore, do you deny emptying the account? Mark hesitated. No, I thought it was fair. I contributed to it too. And the credit card? I was just trying to move on, clean break. By committing fraud? I didn't think that much is clear, the judge said sharply. The courtroom was silent for a beat too long. Ava took the opportunity. Additionally, Your Honor, the business in question, Whitmore & Co., was established by my client prior to the marriage, remains registered solely in her name, and all earnings, taxes, and operations have been kept separate. Mr. Whitmore made no financial or logistical contributions. Mark's lawyer attempted to interject, but the judge held up a hand. I've reviewed the documentation. LLC registration, tax records, proof of sole proprietorship. It's airtight. Mark looked stunned. His eyes flicked toward Claire again, but this time they lingered, searching, maybe pleading. She met his gaze without blinking. He had expected chaos, rage, a scene. Instead, he got court-certified silence. The judge set the printed documents aside with an audible sigh. The court finds sufficient grounds to grant the motion to freeze all shared assets until the final division can be determined. Mr. Whitmore, you are hereby ordered to return the funds withdrawn from the joint account within 24 hours. Failure to do so will result in further penalties. Mark's mouth opened, closed. That money's gone. We spent it. Then I suggest, the judge interrupted coolly, you find a way to replace it. From the gallery, a quiet ripple of murmurs passed through the observers. Attorneys, other couples waiting their turn, a reporter taking notes in the back row. Ava didn't flinch. She leaned over to Claire and whispered, That's checkmate. Mark slumped slightly in his seat. Claire noticed for the first time how tired he looked. How the designer clothes, the hair gel, the overcompensating smirk he'd walked in with had all begun to unravel under the weight of reality. He still didn't fully grasp it. The judge continued. As for the claim to the business, the court has found no evidence of shared ownership. Mr. Whitmore's text messages referring to the boutique as a little shop and a hobby undermine any assertion of investment or contribution. Mark's lawyer stood once more, desperation thinly veiled behind forced calm. Your Honor, even without financial input, my client supported his wife emotionally. He was present during her growth. Moral support, Ava cut in sharply, is not a financial asset, and referring to my client's success with dismissive language doesn't constitute contribution, it constitutes minimization. The judge raised a hand. And I've heard more than sufficient testimony. She folded her hands, looked at Mark. Mr. Whitmore, your conduct suggests deliberate financial misconduct, poor judgment, and an attempt to manipulate marital law for personal gain. This court takes a dim view of such behavior." Mark looked down. For the first time that morning, he didn't try to defend himself. The judge continued, voice firm. "All pending motions on Mr. Whitmore's behalf are denied. Shared assets remain frozen. Mrs. Whitmore retains all rights to her business and separate property. We will reconvene in 30 days for final settlement review. Court is adjourned." The gavel hit the desk. Claire felt no rush of victory, only an exhale, quiet and earned. As she stood, Mark approached. His expression was a strained mix of confusion and disbelief, as though he'd woken in a world he didn't recognize. "You planned this," he muttered. "You knew this would happen." Claire met his eyes calmly. "No, Mark, I just paid attention." He blinked. "You were always cold." "I was always prepared." Ava stepped between them. "We're done here." Claire walked toward the exit, the sound of her heels clicking against the polished floor, echoing like punctuation marks in a finished sentence. Behind her, Mark remained standing, shoulders hunched, like a child who had lost his toy. In the hallway, sunlight spilled through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows on the tiled floor. Claire paused at the top of the stairs and glanced over the atrium railing. There, near the entrance, stood Melissa. She looked smaller now, almost fragile in the harsh morning light. Her once effervescent confidence had dulled into a tight clutch of her purse and a nervous scan of her surroundings. She spotted Mark approaching, and her lips moved, though Claire couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. Melissa's arms remained crossed. Mark gestured, pleading, perhaps. She shook her head once and turned away, walking quickly down the steps and out of view. Claire took it all in without expression. Then she turned, descended the stairs, and stepped out into the crisp Boston air. The city bustled as always. Life moved on, just not in the direction Mark had hoped. 6 months after the hearing, Claire Whitmore unlocked the door to her second boutique. It sat on a prime corner in Cambridge, a few blocks from Harvard Square. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in the afternoon light, illuminating shelves lined with leather handbags and minimalist jewelry. Everything was curated with care. Textures, colors, flow. The space exhaled grace without trying too hard, just like she had learned to. As she walked through the store, clipboard in hand, the hum of low conversation and soft instrumental music wrapped around her. 2 new employees were helping a group of women by the display wall. One a student, another a mother with a toddler on her hip, both left with signature silver shopping bags and surprised smiles. This wasn't just business, it was rebirth. Claire passed by the large floral arrangement near the cash register, a congratulatory gift from a local business association. Attached was a card, "Your story has inspired more women than you know." She didn't need the validation, but it was nice to see the quiet acknowledgement of a truth Mark had never grasped. He had once told her, flatly, that success was about scaling fast or selling smart, that emotion had no place in profit, that her insistence on perfect stitching and handwritten thank you cards was quaint. He'd scoffed at the way she triple-checked invoices, made notes on supplier ethics, ran spreadsheets on customer loyalty. Now, while he waited for callbacks in his childhood bedroom, she signed lease agreements and gave interviews to local press. Claire's phone buzzed. "Ava, just a heads up, Mark filed another petition. Same old arguments, denied again. Judge added a warning about frivolous filings." Claire replied with a simple, "Let him keep digging." She returned to her office, a quiet room in the back of the boutique with glass doors and a view of the main floor. The walls were decorated with framed photos of her first trunk show, the original store launch, and handwritten notes from loyal customers. In the center of the back wall was the framed screenshot of Mark's text, "Have fun with your little shop in your old age." Beneath it, her newest business license was freshly mounted, signed by the city of Cambridge. There was a knock. "Claire," her assistant poked in. "There's someone here to see you. Says her name is Amanda Whitmore." Claire's spine stiffened, just for a moment. Amanda. Mark's older sister. the one who had once defended his behavior over wine and soft apologies. "Send her in," Claire said, her voice neutral. Amanda entered with cautious steps. She looked different, less polished, less certain, the kind of woman who had seen enough fallout to know when silence had cost too much. "I'm not here for him," she said quickly. "I just wanted to say something." Claire waited. "We didn't know," Amanda said. "He lied to all of us. Said you were controlling, cold, that you tried to ruin him after he left. But after everything that came out, those texts, the credit card stuff, I'm ashamed we believed him." Claire studied her, then offered a seat. Amanda sat slowly. "He's still trying to make himself the victim, still blaming you, the judge, everyone but himself. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say, you didn't deserve any of that." Claire didn't reply right away. Instead, she glanced at the framed text on the wall. "I kept that," she said, "not because it hurt, but because it reminded me that I've always known who I am." Amanda followed her gaze and then, quietly, nodded. "Your empire," she murmured. "He never understood it." Claire finally smiled, just a little. "No," she agreed, "but I did." That evening, Claire stood by the front window of her boutique as the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting golden streaks across the polished wood floors. The last customer had left 20 minutes ago, and the shop was bathed in warm quiet, the kind that came not from stillness, but from satisfaction. She watched a couple walking past, hand in hand, pausing briefly to admire the window display she'd finished that morning, a mannequin dressed in a deep emerald coat with a wide leather belt, surrounded by cream-colored handbags arranged like works of art. It wasn't just fashion. It was intentional power. Her phone buzzed again, breaking the calm. Ava. "Mark's latest credit card just got declined. Again?" His attorney called mine, asking if there was any room to revisit the settlement terms amicably. Claire let out a short breath, half amusement, half disbelief. "Tell him no." Then she added, "Tell him the boutique is opening a third location. We're very busy." It was a small, petty victory to imagine Mark squirming, credit maxed, savings drained, waiting for a promotion that would never come. But truthfully, it wasn't revenge that satisfied Claire. It was knowing that every step he thought would ruin her had instead revealed what she was made of. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. Claire turned. Through the glass, she saw a familiar silhouette, taller than she remembered, thinner too, Melissa. Claire unlocked the door just enough to lean her head out. "Melissa." The young woman gave a nervous smile. I wasn't sure if you'd talk to me." Claire considered that. "Why are you here?" Melissa held her purse in both hands like a shield. "I owe you an apology." Claire said nothing. "I believed everything he told me," Melissa continued. "That you were cold, controlling, that you didn't support his dreams, and then, well, after Miami fell apart, he moved into my studio and kept waiting for things to get back on track. He maxed out 2 of my cards before I cut him off." She swallowed. "I thought I was his escape, but really I was just the next placeholder." Claire stepped back, holding the door open. Melissa hesitated, then stepped inside. The scent of amber and clean linen hung in the air, dignified and unmistakably Claire. "He told me once that your shop was just a distraction," Melissa said softly. "Now I realize it's the only real thing either of you ever built." Claire gestured toward the accessory wall. "Everything in here was built one decision at a time. He never noticed the details." Melissa gave a rueful smile. "He doesn't notice much that doesn't serve him." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just full. "I've started my own thing," Melissa said, "social media consulting for women-owned businesses. I even use some of your boutique's launch strategy as inspiration. I hope that's okay." Claire raised an eyebrow. "As long as you don't copy the inventory?" Melissa laughed. "It was smaller, Wiser than the laugh Claire remembered from that holiday party so long ago. As she turned to leave, Melissa stopped at the door. "You don't have to forgive me. I just needed you to know I see it now. Everything." Claire gave a small nod. "Good, that's more than he'll ever do." When the door closed behind her, Claire remained still for a long moment. Outside, the city was shifting into evening, the street lamps flickered on, and Claire once again walked back to her desk, poured herself a glass of wine, not as armor this time, but as punctuation. The empire he never understood was thriving, and she had no intention of slowing down. The framed text message hung directly behind Claire's desk, its black frame simple, understated, but impossible to ignore. It read, "Have fun with your little shop in your old age." Below it, a brass plate engraved with her boutique's latest achievement, Regional Small Business of the Year 2024. The juxtaposition wasn't lost on anyone who stepped into her office, especially not Claire. She'd had it mounted after the second location opened, a decision that had puzzled her team at first. But Claire knew the power of symbols. That message wasn't a wound, it was a landmark. A line in the sand between the version of herself that had once asked for permission and the woman who no longer needed anyone's approval to thrive. This morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The boutique was quiet, still bathed in the gray light of pre-opening hours. She brewed coffee, checked the security feed, and sat down to review vendor proposals for a potential third location in Providence. Her desk was organized as always, files stacked by priority, correspondence printed and clipped. She believed in digital systems, yes, but she also believed in having tangible records. Evidence. Permanence. Mark had never understood that. He had once rolled his eyes at her label maker, scoffing, "You think a spreadsheet can protect you from betrayal?" She hadn't answered then. Now, her answer hung on the wall. As she reviewed the bids, a soft knock came at the door. It was her assistant, the newer Melissa, the one who joined after the first Melissa exited the picture and left only a thin apology in her wake. "There's a young couple here, asking about custom handbags," Melissa said. "They mentioned you gave a talk at the women's conference last fall." The woman said she cried. "Twice." Claire smiled faintly. "Send them in." The couple entered with wide eyes and nervous energy. They introduced themselves as Ava and Jordan, newlyweds in their early 30s, starting a small fashion studio out of Worcester. They spoke in overlapping bursts about sustainability, about building something meaningful, about wanting to learn from someone who had survived both the market and a marriage. Claire listened, measured, then leaned forward. "Let me give you one piece of advice," she said. "Keep your business and your personal life separate. Incorporate everything. Keep clean records. Love is not a contract." Ava nodded slowly, then added, "Your story, what you shared at the panel, just stuck with me. You didn't sound bitter, just clear." "Clarity is underrated," Claire replied. They left 10 minutes later with 3 sample bags and a tentative agreement to collaborate on a custom line. Claire watched them go, something soft flickering behind her calm exterior. Not quite nostalgia, more like recognition. Her phone buzzed. It was from Ava, her lawyer this time. "FYI, Mark just tried to file another motion to revisit the settlement. The judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay additional court costs. Thought you'd enjoy that." Claire set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, letting the moment stretch. Outside, customers were beginning to gather. The boutique opened in 15 minutes, and her team was already preparing. Lights on, bags restocked, new arrivals in position. She stood, adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, and took one last look at the frame behind her. She hadn't just survived him, outbuilt him, outsmarted him, and now she was just getting started. That afternoon, Claire hosted a private preview for a select group of longtime customers. It had become a tradition, seasonal unveilings held before major lines launched to the public. The kind of event Mark once mocked as playing dress-up for rich ladies. Now, those very ladies filled her store, sipping Prosecco and complimenting her on everything from her business growth to her restraint under pressure. "Grace under fire," one of them said, lightly touching Claire's arm. "If I'd been in your shoes, he'd be buried under court filings and burned suits." Claire offered only a smile. "I've found that building something better hurts more than burning things down." The woman laughed, "But less messy, I'm sure." Later, as Claire returned to her office, her assistant was waiting by the door with an envelope. This just came, dropped off by courier. Claire took it, recognizing the return address immediately. Superior Court of Massachusetts. Inside, official confirmation that all of Mark's recent motions had been denied once again. Alongside the paperwork was an addendum from the court clerk. A copy of Mark's complaint had been shared with legal ethics investigators. His attorney had apparently filed the same motion 4 times, each one weaker than the last. Claire sat at her desk, stared at the notice for a long moment, then placed it beneath the framed text on the wall. It was like adding another brushstroke to a portrait she'd never wanted to paint, but now that it hung here, she intended to finish it with elegance. The door creaked open. Young Melissa, poked her head in. "Was that something bad?" "No," Claire replied, "just another failed attempt." Melissa stepped inside, glancing briefly at the frame, then back at Claire. "Can I ask you something?" Claire nodded. "When you first started all this, did you ever think it would turn out like this? Like being the symbol people look up to?" Claire leaned back, hands folded in her lap. "No," she admitted. "When I started, I just wanted to survive. I wanted something that was mine, unshakable. I didn't know it would resonate." Melissa hesitated. "I think people look at you and think, 'She never broke.'" Claire paused. Then, gently, "I did break, just not where anyone could see." A silence passed between them, not heavy, but full. And then Melissa smiled. "There's a student fashion group at Emerson," she said. "They're doing a panel on women in retail. They ask if you'd be open to mentoring." Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked out the glass wall of her office at the boutique floor, her team, her customers, her world. "Yes," she said finally, "tell them I'll speak. But only if they're ready for the truth, not the gloss." Melissa grinned. "That's why they want you." After she left, Claire pulled a new file from her drawer, Expansion Plans, Providence, and began making notes. A 3rd location wasn't just a goal anymore. It was a promise. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She considered not answering, but curiosity won. She tapped the screen and brought it to her ear, a beat of silence. Then a voice she hadn't heard in months. "Claire, it's Barbara." "Mark's mother." Claire said nothing. "I'm not calling for him. I wanted you to know that we've stopped making excuses for him. He's still blaming everyone but himself, but we're not buying it anymore." Claire stared at the framed message. "That's your legacy," Barbara said. "You showed us what strength actually looks like." And then, almost sheepishly, "I ordered one of your new satchels last week. The camel leather. It's beautiful." Claire's voice was steady. "Thank you, Barbara. I hope it lasts you a long time." She hung up and returned to her notes. Outside, her boutique lit up under the soft glow of twilight. Inside, Claire worked, silent, sure, unshakable, and the frame on her wall watched over it all. I was cleaning out a drawer I hadn't opened in years when I found it. A soft, beaten envelope with my name scrawled in my mother's handwriting. Before the arthritis, before the bitterness, back when her letters curved like garden vines. I knew, without opening it, that it wasn't recent. The postmark confirmed it. April 17, 2019, the week I moved out, the week everything split down the middle. I don't know how it got lost in that drawer. Or maybe I do. There's a certain kind of grief that rearranges furniture in your mind. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a single page. Faded ink, but her voice unmistakable. "Claire, if you're reading this, I guess you finally went through with it. You walked away, and I want you to know I don't blame you. I haven't said this enough, but I see you. I see how hard it's been for you to prove yourself, not just to this family, but to yourself. I wish I'd stood up for you more. Don't let Mark or anyone tell you who you are. You know, and I believe you'll be better than all of us. Love, Mom. I read it once, then again. Then I folded it carefully and slid it between the glass of a frame that once held our wedding photo. Later that morning, I took a drive, not to the courthouse or the boutique, or even to the lawyer's office. To a quiet little cemetery just outside Dedham. I hadn't visited since the funeral. I told myself it was because I didn't want to perform grief. But the truth is, I hadn't forgiven her for what she didn't say when I needed her to. For the silences, for the complicit nods at Mark's charm. But now I had this letter, and that changed things. I stood by her grave, the letter in hand, and said aloud what I should have said years ago. I forgive you. The wind didn't answer. Neither did the trees. But something inside me did shift. Back in town, a voicemail waited. Mark, of course. Claire, I heard from Mom. About the satchel. About the panel talk. You're doing all this and I'm not even allowed near the building anymore. I just wanted to say, I get it now. I know I broke things. Not just with you, but with me. And I know I have no right to ask, but I want to make it right however I can. Even if it's just once. I deleted it, not out of spite, but because the words were meant for someone I no longer was. I didn't need Mark's apology. I didn't even need his acknowledgement anymore. That was the point of the last 5 years. Building something that stood whether he clapped or not. And yet, that afternoon, a staff member brought in a legal envelope, new handwriting, neat, feminine. I opened it slowly. Inside, a photocopy of a prenup addendum dated 2017, notarized, signed by both Mark and myself. A clause I didn't remember: in case of divorce due to infidelity, the injured party retained full rights to all joint investment assets made during the marriage, including businesses launched thereafter. I stared at it. It had been mailed anonymously. No note, but I knew the handwriting. Melissa, of course she knew. She'd been Mark's assistant through the early years. She had access to the archive storage, the contracts, the witnesses, and she'd waited until she knew I no longer needed it, but maybe still deserved it. I laughed, a quiet, almost disbelieving sound. Sometimes the universe hands you closure not as a final blow, but as a soft touch on the shoulder. She went on. I picked up my phone, not to call Mark, but to call my lawyer. There was one last loose thread I wanted tied, for good. 2 weeks later, the final hearing was held in a modest courtroom tucked inside the Norfolk County Courthouse. I didn't wear black this time. I wore deep forest green, the color of fresh beginnings. My attorney sat beside me, calm and confident. Across the aisle, Mark slouched next to a man I didn't recognize, likely another court-appointed lawyer, judging by the mismatched tie and briefcase that had seen too many battles. When the judge read aloud the ruling, there was no dramatic pause, just the steady voice of the law. I retain full rights to the boutique, the investment portfolios under my name, and sole ownership of the Cambridge property. Mark was to pay back the outstanding joint debts within 18 months. There was no appeal. He looked at me once as they gathered their papers, not angry, not defiant, just tired, hollow. And maybe that's what happens when the games finally stop working, when charm fades and consequences have teeth. Outside, the late April sun caught on the courthouse windows. I breathed in the crisp New England air, clean, cool, and mine. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the Charles Street location of the boutique, our 5th and newest store. The grand opening was in 3 days, but the display window already shimmered with spring silks and hand-cut glass vases. Emma, my assistant manager, waved from inside, her hands full of ribbons. I didn't go in. Instead, I turned the corner and walked down the block to a small brick cafe. I'd passed it a dozen times before, but never gone in. Today felt like the right day for something new. The bell above the door chimed. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window. No laptop, no phone. Just me and the rare silence that comes after everything that needed to be said has finally been said. Across the street, a mother in a navy peacoat knelt to tie her daughter's shoe. The child laughed, sunlight catching her curls. That's what healing looked like, I thought. Not grand gestures, just ordinary moments that no longer felt heavy. When I got home that night, I lit the lavender candle Mark had always hated. I played Nina Simone on vinyl and danced barefoot across the living room floor. Leo, our tabby cat, who had loyally chosen to stay with me, watched from the window sill with amused disinterest. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. He's moving back to Syracuse next week, living with his parents, working part-time at his uncle's garage. Just thought you'd want to know. Hope you're good, Claire. You deserve everything. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back one word. Thanks. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to feel sorry, either. That wasn't my weight anymore. The next morning, I opened my inbox to find an invitation. A women's entrepreneurship panel hosted by Harvard Business School. They wanted me as a keynote speaker, the theme, Building from the Ashes. I smiled. It wasn't revenge that got me here. It was resilience. Quiet, steady, deliberate resilience. And while Mark had once tried to take everything, in the end he only taught me how to fight smarter, how to love myself harder, and how to reclaim what was always mine to begin with. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. And for the first time in years, I whispered to the silence, I'm finally free. Thank you for joining us on Claire Whitmore's unforgettable journey, a story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate freedom. We hope her strength, quiet courage, and unshakable dignity reminded you that even the deepest wounds can become the roots of new beginnings. To every woman who's ever been underestimated, used, or silenced, this story is for you. You are not alone, you are not defeated, and your comeback, it's just getting started. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful dramas that reveal hidden truths and the women brave enough to rise above them. Until next time, choose freedom. Choose you.